Hey everyone, how are you doing? I'm Eric from Lonesome Reader, and as we get to the 20-year mark of the 21st century, you know there's going to be a load of lists of like the best books of the century so far and all these lists, and these lists have been coming out already. Like I made a video last year about a website that made the greatest books of the 21st century so far and my reaction to that list. And another list came out recently from the Times where they published 100 books that they love the most that have been published in the 21st century, and it's interesting how they frame this, that it's not books that, you know, they're not trying to self-consciously create a canon. These are just 100 books that they've loved, and I think it's 16 reviewers and critics came together to come up with this list of books. And so I'll put a link down to it below, so you can look at the article. But I thought I'd go through this list and look at those 100 books and see how many I've read, because, you know, with all these geeky lists, the first thing that we like to do is go through and see how many we've read. And so out of these 100 books, I've read only 37 of them, which I guess is sort of okay. It's, you know, a little more than a third, which is pretty good. But you know, I sort of wish, since I'm reading all the time, I wish I'd read a lot more of these. And some of these are ones that I've been wanting to read. So I'm just going to go through the list. I'm not going to talk about every single book, but I'll talk about my reactions to some of the books. And I'll put up the list as I go through it on the side here, so you can look at it and think about it. And we could just have a fun little debate about it. But I'd really be interested if you could put in the comments below one book on this list that you've read and that you'd agree with and really champion as like a book you've loved so much that you hope other people will read. And then one book that you'll be really interested in reading, that you've either wanted to get to or one that you've never heard of before looking at this list, and now put it on your own TBR, because some of these books I'd never heard of before and sound really interesting, so I'll be eager to get to them now. Like I said, it's just books that they've loved, and they sort of identify how there's different trends in publishing now from before, you know, the year 2000, where there's a lot more, it feels like there's a lot more diversity in publishing, and there's more works in translation which are being published. I think almost 10 books on this list are books in translation, which traditionally hasn't been the case. So yeah, it's interesting looking how our reading tastes are changing and how the publishing world is changing over the past 20 years or so. So starting with the first 10 books, I'll put up the list on the side here, looking at them. And number one on their list is Conversations with Friends by Szalay Rooney, which is an author obviously much in vogue now. And it's sort of interesting that they chose her first novel over her second novel, Normal People, which has, you know, currently on the long list for the Women's Prize for Fiction. I've heard from, I think most people sort of feel that Normal People, they prefer Normal People over Conversations with Friends, and I don't really know. They're different sort of books in a way. I mean, they're in very similar style, very much her style of writing. But yeah, I hugely enjoyed this novel and was glad to see it on the list. And also, it's worth noting that the Sunday Times do a Young Writer of the Year award, which I've talked about a lot in the past, and Szalay Rooney has won that award before. So I think you'll see a number of authors from that prize on this list, because obviously the critics who go to making this prize are partial to these authors, and so which I agree with. It's they identify a lot of really great new up-and-coming authors. I think this is great. I don't know if I would call it one of my favorite books of the 21st century so far, but it's a very good novel. Then there's Olive Kitteridge, which I absolutely would count as one of my favorite books of the year. I've talked about Elizabeth Strout a lot before. I just love her writing so much and feel such a personal connection to it, because she often sets her books in Maine, and I'm from the state of Maine. So Olive Kitteridge is such a brilliant character, and it's going to be so exciting later this year that she's publishing a sequel to this novel where we'll get to meet Olive again. Then next on the list is Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And yeah, this novel is so brilliant. I love her writing so much. I mean, it's sort of hard to choose. If I had to pick one of her books, I should have said that they've chosen with each author to limit themselves to picking one of their books rather than a whole group of their books, just to have a more diverse list. And yeah, and they've chose Americana, and I love this novel so much. It's great. But if I had to pick one of her novels, it would probably be Half a Yellow Sun. I have these great editions, which Fourth Estate published these nice special editions of her books. And Half a Yellow Sun, I mean, it's more complex novel looking at war. I mean, this has a lot of complexity in it as well, but it's a much more sort of personal, focused story than this. I don't know. It's difficult to choose between them, but they're both such great novels that I would hugely recommend. Then Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night. I love that novel. Yeah, I think it's Mark Haddon's novel is so great. I don't know if I'd count it as one of my favorites. I mean, there's a stage production of this novel too, which is really great to see. They've done such a creative, excellent job at adapting it for the stage. But yeah, it is a great novel. The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Yeah, this is brilliant, even though it terrified me. It's probably one of the scariest novels I've read in the past 20 years or so. There are scenes in it which are absolutely terrifying, and the whole overall concept of the book is terrifying, of this sort of post-apocalypse novel of a father and son walking down a long road trying to find a place of shelter and safety, and yeah, it's just heartbreaking and tragic, and but really beautifully done. The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen. So, this much lauded novel, and, and I hugely enjoyed it at the time, but I feel like it's a novel that hasn't really stuck out in my mind so much. I don't know how you feel about Jonathan Franzen. I mean, I loved his novel Freedom too, the experience reading it, but it's one of those books that I don't feel like it was, as distinctive enough in the form it takes or in the subjects it handles that it doesn't stand out to me as a novel I've loved the most. But it's an interesting distinction, thinking like, what books would you pick as important books, and what books would you pick as just reading experiences that you've loved so much. And and I did hugely enjoy reading this, but yeah, if I was thinking of like books that I think are probably the most important or that have sort of changed the game of how we read novels or how novels are written, I wouldn't pick this, but there you go. And so next, the Green Road by Anne Enright. And Anne Enright's a writer I love so much, and I've read, I think, almost all of her books, and she's just brilliant. And I would say that there are sections of this novel which are probably better than other sections. It's incredible how this is almost a novel in novella forms, because each section almost ends as its own novella, even though it's all about one family and different parts of that family. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a beautiful, really strong novel, but I would say there are parts of it which are stronger than others. Like the section in New York, One of the Sons, is just so brilliantly done. Then The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry. This is a much loved novel, and yeah, I loved reading this. It's such a great reading experience, and yeah, I hugely enjoyed it. But it's another novel which I would say, I don't know, is it really changing the form of fiction? Like, probably not, but what it does beautifully well and really, really intelligently. It's a very surprising story, and I think it sort of I know some people were a bit disappointed by it because they expected it to be more about a story of a monster, but it's more a historical novel about a few different characters in a time of a place in time which society is changing quite a lot, and is marking how it's changing in those ways. But yeah, also should be noted, it has one of the most beautiful covers. I mean, everybody's said that, but yeah, it does. So then Naomi Alderman, Disobedience. I haven't read that, but I have read Naomi Alderman's novel The Power, which won the Women's Prize for Fiction So yeah, I would like to read Disobedience. I've not read All the Light We Cannot See. I know a lot of people have read this and loved it, but just it's a novel I haven't got around to yet. Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. This is a novel I feel almost guilty. I haven't read yet, but I've really been wanting to read. I know a lot of people love it so much, so yeah, one of those I feel really guilty about. Then we came to the end by Joshua Ferris. I did read this and hugely enjoyed it. It's really complex, interesting novel and does some really innovative things. But it sort of hasn't stood out in my mind over the years. A Visit from the Goon Squad I haven't read. I know I really ought to because I think the form of it is supposed to be really interesting as well as the subject matter. But I have read her novel Manhattan Beach, which I hugely enjoyed. It's a great novel. Brooklyn by Colm Toibin. This novel is so great, and one of these books that really surprised me. The reading experience of it really surprised me because I was reading it and enjoying the experience of the novel, but I didn't really understand like what is the point of this book. But then like 3/4 of the way through the book, it gets to this heartbreaking point where I totally got it, and I thought, wow, this is brilliant, and I think it is a great, brilliant novel. Though I would struggle to say whether I'd pick this novel over his novel The Master, his novel which is a fictionalization of the life of Henry James, which I loved so much. I think it's an incredible novel. So yeah, I think it's really difficult to choose between those two books, but he's a brilliant writer, and would really recommend all of his writing. West by Karis Davies. This is a novel I haven't read, very short novel. It was only published last year, but has been praised hugely. And it's a novel which I'm going to read very soon because it is shortlisted for the Rathbones Folio Prize. And I want to read a book from that list, so I'm going to read this very soon. I swear, I keep saying I'm going to read it, but I'm actually going to read this very soon. So really looking forward to this. Golden Hill by Francis Spufford. This one, I think the Desmond Elliott Award. I haven't read it. I've heard lots of great things, but heard some criticism of it too. Not read Robert Harris. Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. I mean, this is a hugely influential novel, and one that I love, and I love his writing too. But I would say that, there probably with most people, there are sections of this novel which I enjoyed much more than other sections, and found it almost frustrating that I was just waiting for it to get back to, because it's a novel that starts telling a number of stories and then it folds back on itself and it revisits those stories, and some of the stories I really wanted to get back to, and other ones felt a bit more tedious. I just sort of had to wade through them to get to these other sections that I enjoyed much more. It's such a creative, innovative novel. I enjoyed the whole experience of it, and I thought that the film adaptation of it was pretty good as well. So, there's that as well. Then there's All My Puny Sorrows by Miriam Taves. Is that how you pronounce her name? I always get her name wrong. My natural instinct is to call her Miriam Towes, but I think it's Miriam Taves. Please correct me if I'm wrong. All My Puny Sorrows. I haven't read this. I really want to. One of my favorite novels of last year was her most recent novel, Woman Talking, which I thought was brilliant. And everyone keeps pointing as this as one of her novels, which is brilliant. So really need to get to. The Yellow Birds by Kevin Powers. I haven't read that, but I've heard good things about it and wanting to get to it. We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver. I love this novel, and I would say this is one of the novels I've loved the most in the past 20 years, because I think it's a really gripping reading experience, but also really heartbreaking in a way, and it deals with issues of motherhood and parent-child relations in a way that's really powerful, I think. So I would agree with that. I haven't read Michael Frayn's novel Spies. I think I've only read one Michael Frayn novel. I can't remember what it was. Hope, a Tragedy by Shalom Oslander. This is a novel I haven't heard of before, but it sounds so interesting. So I'll just read the summary of it, because it sounds so odd and unique. Oslander's novel is one of the most caustic, clever, and expletive-filled you could hope to read. Solomon Kugel finds Anne Frank in his attic, alive and furious. And wow, that sounds like such an interesting premise. And so yeah, I'm gonna have to seek this novel out because I think that sounds so interesting. Then Late in the Day by Tessa Hadley. This is one of the most recently published novels. It was only published this year in 2019. Yeah, I've never read Tessa Hadley, but I always meant to. And this, yeah, it sounds really good. A novel about friendship, loss, and jealousy, focusing on two couples who have been close friends for decades. And they cite her as an under-celebrated British author. But yeah, haven't got to reading her yet, and I really want to. Though, fun fact, Anna Marie Crowhurst, who wrote the novel The Illumination of Ursula Flight, Tessa Hadley was a teacher of hers. So there you go. That's just a fun little fact. If you've read Anna Marie Crowhurst's novel. Then Old Filth by Jane Gardam. I have read this novel. I enjoyed it. I thought it was good, but hasn't stuck out and haven't remembered it too much. It's the only Jane Gardam novel that I've read. I'd like to read more of her work, but yeah, it hasn't really stuck out in my mind so much. Life of Pi by Jan Martel, the Booker Prize winning novel. Yeah, I hugely enjoyed this novel. I think it's really interesting, creative experience. And also, I remember at the time when it won the Booker Prize, the Booker judges said, you know, if you read it closely enough, you can tell whether this novel is truth or fiction, the way he wrote it, whether it's fact or fantasy. And it always made me feel a bit stupid. It's like, I didn't get whether it was, so I feel like I need to go back and read it again to figure out if I can see like so is this supposed to be true or is it just this fantasy experience of him after he was shipwrecked? Who knows? There you go. So NW by Zadie Smith. This is actually the only Zadie Smith novel I haven't read, really shamefully. I think it's supposed to be one of her most technically innovative books. Like how she structured it and wrote it is quite different. But yeah, I mean, I've loved all of her other fiction. I don't know why I haven't got around to reading this yet. I just haven't. Then All Families Are Psychotic by Douglas Copeland. I don't think I've read this. Douglas Copeland's novels all sort of blend together to me, which is sort of bad to say. But yeah, the way he writes about sort of wayward young people, it just sort of all blends together to me. So no, I don't think I've read this, but I've read a few of his books. God's Own Country by Ross Brazen. I haven't read this, but I really want to. And I really want to read his writing because, weirdly, this is just total coincidence. He's a friend of mine, so I've been to parties where he's there, but I've never spoken to him, and I've always sort of wanted to because I've been interested in reading his writing. I've read a short story of his, but not any more of his writing. So yeah, I would really like to read that. Don't know Legend of a Suicide. I've not heard of that before. If Nobody Speaks of Remarkable Things, this is a novel I really want to read by John McGregor. I really loved his recent novel, Reservoir 13, and yeah, I really want to read more of his writing because he's such an interesting writer. The Little Chairs by Edna O'Brien. Yeah, I did read this, really enjoyed it. I don't think I would count it as one of my most loved reading experiences of the past 20 years, but I really want to read more of Edna O'Brien's writing. Grief is the Thin with Feathers by Max Porter. This is another writer who's won the Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year award, and yeah, he's incredible. His most recent novel, Lammy, is great as well. The form of his writing is really surprising and interesting and yeah, game changing. But also the subject, you know, his writing has real heart as well. And yeah, I think he's so great. The Plot Against America by Philip Roth. This is a novel Philip Roth isn't one of my favorite writers. You know, he's one of these revered American writers, but I did think this was a great novel and one of his probably most interesting of his later novels. So I'd agree on that. Arlington Park by Rachel Cusk. It's sort of interesting they choose this over Outline, which has been one of her most lauded books. So I've not read this, and I enjoyed Outline, but I don't think it's one of the greatest books of the past 20 years. That's just my opinion. Let the Great World Spin by Colin McCann. This is a writer I always mean to read. I'm sure I love his writing, but I just haven't got around to reading him yet. You know how there's authors like that, where you just have this feeling that like, I'm gonna love this author's writing, but I just haven't read him yet, and shamefully, I haven't read The Forgiven. I don't know what that is. Master Pip is a great novel. I hugely enjoyed this. Really interesting sort of take on the story of Great Expectations, but in a very different context. So yeah, Lloyd Jones is really interesting writer and very fun to read. I've not read The Secret River by Kate Grenville. I know I really ought to. Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. I hugely enjoyed this novel. Really great. So yeah, would totally agree with that. Any Human Heart by William Boyd. I've not read any William Boyd, sort of shamefully. Another one of the shameful authors I haven't read. Daughters of Jerusalem by Charlotte Mendelsohn. This is an author I've always meant to read as well, but just not got around to. Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. And yeah, this, so sort of controversially, this isn't my favorite novel by him. I know this is a lot of people's favorite book by him, but it didn't really stick with me in the way that other novels of his. I know probably his favorite novel of mine that I've read is The Unconsoled, which I know wasn't published in the 21st century. I think it was published in 98 or 99, but yeah, I just loved that novel so much. In some of his books since Never Let Me Go, I've enjoyed more, but that's just my opinion. All That Man Is, Notes on a Scandal by Zoe Heller, which I have here. And yeah, I'd say this really enjoyable reading experience, but I don't know if it would stick out as like one of the best books that I've read. But yeah, it's a great story, and and was made into a really fun movie. I think in the movie they made it into more of a sensationalist type story than it's handled a bit more sensitively in the novel, I think, but the movie is hugely fun. So yeah, All the Man Is by David Szalay. So this is more of a book of short stories than a novel, though some of the characters in the stories connect a bit, but yeah, I really enjoyed this. I thought it was really interesting, but probably doesn't stand out as the best to me. The Noise of Time by Julian Barnes. This is great. I think Julian Barnes is a really great, he deserves to be lauded as much as he is, because he writes about such interesting subjects in a really powerful way, and The Noise of Time is so great. And I don't know if I would count this over his other novel. What's the name of it? That won the Booker Prize several years ago and was made into a film a couple of years ago. But yeah, Noise of Time is a great novel. So Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. Yeah, hugely enjoyable. As a reading experience, this is probably one of my most loved reading experiences in the past 20 years, because such a great twisty story, as well as being clever and a really interesting new kind of take on a historical novel. And I think without this book there wouldn't be books like The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gower, and I think Sarah Waters was a winner of the Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year award as well. But yeah, I love her writing so much. She's fantastic. Atonement by Ian McEwan. Ian McEwan's a writer that I've sort of gone off from a bit. I just haven't really been interested in reading any of his books recently, to be honest. But I do think this is a great novel. Really enjoyed it, and yeah, it was really powerful, and yeah, a really great film as well. Train Dreams by Dennis Johnson. I haven't read Dennis Johnson, shamefully. Zone of Interest. I'm just going to come out and say, I'm not interested in Martin Amis. I've read a few of his books before, and I know he's supposed to be so influential and he's so lauded and all of that, but I'm just not interested in him. That's just my opinion. If you love Martin Amis, let me know below why you love him, and yeah, think if you think I should give him another shot, let me know. I haven't read Benjamin Markovitz. Mothering Sunday by Graham Swift. Yeah, it's a great novel. I hugely enjoyed it. I think it's really powerful, and I was sort of surprised it didn't get more award attention than it did. Digging to America by Ann Tyler. I haven't read this. This is one of the only Ann Tyler novels I haven't read, because I love her writing so much. I think she's brilliant and great. And yeah, so it's bad I haven't read Digging to America. Small Island by Andrea Levy. This novel, I feel a bit ashamed I haven't read this either. Breath by Tim Winton. I love this novel so much. It's so beautiful, and look, it has a really beautiful cover as well. I just read his novel, most recent novel, The Shepherd's Hut, which was published last year as well, and that's a great novel too. But yeah, I definitely agree. This stands out as one of the best reading experiences in the past 20 years. Yeah, I just love this book so much. The White Tiger by Aravind Adiga, Booker Prize winner, and yeah, this is great. I remember hugely enjoying reading this novel, and it was really powerful. But it hasn't sort of stood out in my mind so much. I honestly can't remember much about the story or tell you much about it. But I think it's one of those books that I should really revisit because of that, because I don't remember it so well. I think if I read it again, it would probably hit me how powerful it really is. Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. I feel really guilty. I haven't read this. I haven't read either of her books. And I feel really guilty as I follow her on Twitter. I really enjoy her Twitter account. She's really engaged and political. And yeah, I just always meant to read her and haven't. But yeah, she's obviously a much loved writer. Junot Diaz, The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. I've not read this, but I've always meant to. The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. I've not read this either, though. Yeah, I love Margaret Atwood's writing, and yeah, always meant to get to it. Funny thing, my partner can never remember the name of this novel, and he always calls it the Blind Spy for some reason, but I don't know why. Whenever it comes up, The Secret Scripture by Sebastian Barry. I've not read this, but you know, I've read Sebastian Barry's recent novel, Are in This Number's Days. That's what it's called, right? Is that right? Gosh. But yeah, I made a whole video about how much I loved that recent novel of his, but how I hated the marketing of it. I thought I was really offended by how it was marketed. But yeah, he's such a great writer. I really want to read more of his books. Then we have The Year of Runaways by Sanjeev Sahota. This is a novel with beautiful cover that I've really meant to read and was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, and he was also shortlisted for the Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year award, and I've not read it yet, but I really want to. It just sounds like such a great novel, and I've heard really good things about it from a lot of people whose opinion I respect. The Sun by Philip Meyer. I don't know that. I've not read it. English Passengers by Matthew Neal. I've not read this. I know I really should have. The Interestings by Meg Waltzer. I've never read Meg Waltzer, but I really want to. I feel like that's a writer another one of those writers whose writing I'd probably love, but just not got to yet. Home Fire by Kamila Shamsie, which won the Women's Prize for fiction. Yeah, this is such an enjoyable reading experience, as well as being a really powerful political novel as well. So yeah, really agree with this. Gilead by Marilyn Robinson. This is another book that sort of controversially, a lot of people loved this novel by her, but I didn't. It didn't really strike me. I think she's an incredible writer, and her novel Housekeeping and her novel Lila, which was a sequel to Gilead, the third book in a trilogy. I loved Lila, but I don't know, didn't really get on with Gilead. It didn't really strike me. True History of a Kelly Gang. This is another novel that I enjoyed this book, which I think it won the Booker Prize, didn't it? But it hasn't really stuck with me. But his novel, My Life as a Fake, I loved much more, and which I don't think got any awards attention. But I loved that book much more than this. Star of the Sea by Joseph O'Connor. Haven't read that. Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. Yeah, I loved this novel. I thought it was such a powerful story and so great, and was shortlisted for the Women's Prize. And she's an incredible writer. So yeah, I'm really excited to see more from her in the future. I hope she writes more, because she's great. I've not read The Constant Gardener. Then Midwinter Break by Bernard McCleverty. I've not read this, but I kept meaning to, because everyone says it's great and everyone says he's a great writer, but I've not read him yet. Harvest by Jim Crace. Yes, this novel is brilliant and so good, and yeah, gave me such weird dreams and nightmares. Really affected me subconsciously, I think. So yeah, I would highly recommend that. Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. I started reading this. It has an incredibly powerful opening, but then it got into this complex historical story, and I just don't know enough about the historical time period that I felt like lost constantly. I felt like I had to keep going to research the time period and what was happening politically to understand it, and so I just didn't. So, I know this is a much loved novel that I should go back to at some point. I've not read Home by Toni Morrison, though, yeah, she's a great writer and obviously really respect and love her writing, but I've not read Home yet. The Siege by Helen Dunmore. I've read my first Helen Dunmore novel just last month, and yeah, I want to read more by her. Even though I didn't love that novel that I read by her, but I've heard good things about The Siege, so would like to read that. I've not read How to Be Good by Nick Hornby. Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. Brilliant, beautiful novel, yeah, and deserved to win the Booker Prize. And it's so innovative and brilliant and complex and wonderful. This is a novel that I know I could go back and read and reread and find new things in it all the time, and also just love the whole wacky experience of it because it's such a crazy ride. So, Line of Beauty by Alan Hollinghurst. Yeah, it's a great novel. I don't know if I'd count it as one of my favorites or the best, sort of, yeah, controversially, but it's really good. The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. Yes, that is brilliant and so beautiful and so moving. And I read it around the time when the current U.S. president came into office, so it was a hugely emotional read for me as well at the time, just because of the context. Darkmans by Nicola Barker. I've not read this Nicola Barker novel, but I've read a few of the other books. She's such an interesting writer. She's so creative and powerful. So I would like to read this. Dissolution by C.J. Sansom. Not read that. The Book of Heathen by Robert Edric. Nope, I've not read that either. I've not read Michael Chabon's novel, The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Cray. I know I should have. A lot of people love it so much, and one I really want to get to. I've not read I'll Go to Bed at Noon by Gerard Woodward, but I've read another novel of his. I can't remember which one. Can't remember the name of it, but he's really powerful, really beautiful writing. I'd really like to read this. Then they have a section for novels in translation, which actually I think there's more than 10 books, probably 12 or 15. But yeah, sort of shamefully, I haven't read any of these books. I've not read any Elena Ferrante. I know, there's a whole craze around her writing, and I'd really like to. I'm sure I'd really love her books, but I've just not got to them yet. And then a lot of these other books I've not heard of before. I've heard of Emmanuel Carrère, but not read him before. Heard of Submission by Michel Houellebecq, but I've not read it. The only novel I have read on these books in translation, which is probably an indication that I need to read more books in translation, is Lullaby by Leila Slimani, which has obviously been a huge best-selling novel and was called The Perfect Nanny in America, I think. But that's Lullaby's a novel I enjoyed, but I don't know if I'd say I love. I enjoyed both of her novels that have been translated into English, but I don't know if I'd say I loved them so much. And also with Lullaby, like Britta Bowler in her review of it, she pointed out, because she's practiced law before, she said like some of the legal things in it, like that wouldn't have happened and it's not realistic. And hugely enjoyable reading experience. And the Your Faces Tomorrow trilogy is are books by Javier Marias. I've always meant to read him, but never got around to him. I know that Ali Smith is a big fan of his. And then Flights by Olga Tokarczuk. As I've talked about a lot recently with the Man Booker International Prize, this is a novel I started, but I gave up on because I just wasn't enjoying it. But it's one that I do want to go back to because her writing's really powerful. And, and like I've said recently, her most recent translated novel, Drive Your Plow for the Bones of the Dead, I enjoyed so much more. And it's a great novel. Although, I don't know if I'd count it as really profound. So, like I said recently in my video, I was sort of surprised to see it on the shortlist for the Man Booker International Prize, but she's an incredibly interesting writer, very intelligent, interesting writing. Yeah, so those are all the books I've read. Oh, also Austerlitz by W.G. Sebald. it's another book. I feel sort of ashamed I haven't read that. I have read one of his books before, and yeah, he's incredibly interesting, very intellectual, but also surprising, innovative writing as well. And it was so sad that that he died when he did before his time. So yeah. Those are all the books I'll talk about because I've been going on for too long. But yeah, let me know in the comments below if one or more of these books that stand out to you as one of the reading experiences you've loved most of books that have been published in the past 19 and a half years. And yeah, if pick out a book that you'd really want to read now off from this list. And yeah, and just let me know what you think about lists like this in general. Will you come up with your own list of like favorite books of the 21st century so far once we get to that 20-year mark? Let me know in the comments below. So thank you for watching and happy reading, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye everyone.